this from over here and that from over there and something else from over there and something else from over there and get it all together, you have to have trade. This becomes especially true when you go to something bigger like an automobile or an airplane, and I spent 27 years at Lockheed. The material to build it comes from many, many different places. No one place on earth has everything you need to put together anything that's complicated or sophisticated. Therefore, you need trade. The people of India did not value their merchants, so they were, like you might say, predestined to only go so far and be blocked. Again, China did the same thing. All right. Now, the pariahs, the outcast, got to be that way because of some, they were born into it. Generally, they did not allow you to move from one caste to another. However, all throughout all of history, the history of everybody, there are persons who have started out poor and worked their way to the top. It happens more in our country, United States, than it does anywhere else. But India, not even India, there's some people who happen to be at the right place at the right time, or somehow you might say win life's lottery, or somehow maybe through their own abilities can start out at the bottom and work their way to the very top. But generally, a person was born in a caste and stayed there. Now, they also believed in reincarnation. In other words, when you died, you came back. Well, what you came back as depended on the way you lived in this life. Suppose you started out as a lower animal, and if you were good as a lower animal, you'd come back as a better animal, and then eventually you might come out as a human being. And you could look forward to a better life in the next life. And for the people of India, life was oftentimes short and hard, so they could look forward to maybe a better life. And eventually, if you kept being good enough and getting better and better in each of your lives, you would reach the ultimate state of existence. I hope I'm spelling it right. Brahman. In other words, that was where you were at the top and would not have to come back to this world anymore. Reincarnation, a big part of their belief that gave them hope for a better life in the next life and ultimately to the very highest. Some of their gods were Vishnu, Hare Krishna, Brahman, of course. Now, ultimately, they were to develop over 1 million gods we know of. But again, if you're a Westerner and you talk to a person from India, he'll say, "Oh no, we're really monotheists. We believe in only one spirit behind all of them, and these different gods are just different manifestations of the same ultimate one spirit." So they will try to convince you that they really are monotheists if they know you're one. Again, take that for whatever it's worth. Now, we do not have a whole lot of the detailed history of India until we come to a man named Chandragupta Maurya. Now, Chandragupta Maurya is believed to have been part of Alexander the Great's army. Now, if you know anything at all, I asked you last time, and every hand went up. Hopefully then all of you have at least heard of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great started out here in Macedonia, first conquered Greece, then went into Asia Minor and conquered everywhere he went and never lost a battle. He wound up here in India. But in India, he picked up an Indian man named Chandragupta Maurya, and he promoted Chandragupta very high. When Alexander's troops refused to march on any farther, it won't go off again. When Alexander's troops refused to march any farther, he turned back Chandra Gupta Maurya behind and set himself up on the empire that Alexander had started. And he built himself an empire, and he started a dynasty called the Mauryan dynasty that was to govern India for a long time. Now, to make a long story short about the political history of India, well, okay, I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. I've got to explain something else. I mean, they also tend to believe, the people of India, all life is sacred. Again, I had to digress about Maurya because they believe that all life is sacred. Even animal life. Now, folks, on a very personal note here, I have observed that persons who have more than a usual love for animals and animal life oftentimes have a cold, heartless attitude toward humanity. India was hardly an exception. I don't know if this still goes on. I mean, I ought to research, I guess, but even when I was a child in India, the trucks would go by, look for a dead body, human body on the side of the street, pick that body up, and then take it outside to a common grave and dump them all down and cover them over, and that was their burial. And even your book mentioned compassion for fellow human society. Now, if you think this is cold and cruel, I've got to explain something I learned just last fall when a student from India wrote a paper about the Hindu religion. That actually, the reason they feel so hard, they look so, when a person gets sick, now a woman named Mother Teresa changed a lot of this. When a person got sick, they just simply dump him off into a separate house and leave that person to die. Hospitals were unknown, and the care for the sick was unknown. And it's known that half the people they sent to these hospitals would recover if they got treatment. And some of them recovered anyway and came back out and lived a good many years after. But there's just simply no compassion at all. But she explained that the reason for this is that they believe that, hey, this person's on his way to a better life anyway, so why bother save this life for them? When they die, they're going to come back they'll come back. And your book opens up with a big net in this chapter where the man was about to go to war in India, and he looked at his superior officer and said, hey, I'm going to have to kill these people whom I grew up with. And the officer said, hey, to be born is to die, and to die is to be reborn again. The cycle, don't worry about killing them because they'll come back again in another form, depending on how they live in this life. So, so that's why what seems to us Westerners might seem so cold and heartless, so cruel. To them, it's just, they'll come back in another life. And a very notoriously bad man named Adolf Eichmann said the same. He said, I did these Jews a favor. Why? He said, if we could know what was in the next life, we'd commit suicide to get over there. He believed that everybody went to bliss in the next life, went to heaven, and there was no hell. So therefore, there was no such thing as sin. So what he did, kept taking part in killing millions of Jews, was to him, well, that was doing them a favor. And anyway, I could go say more about it. I won't. All right, now, having gone there, I'll get back to the Mauryan dynasty. The Mauryan dynasty took over much of India for a while, but then India fragmented. And while the Hindu religion called for unity, India hardly has ever had unity. To make a long story short, India was to spend the next 3,000 years divided or ruled by foreigners. In recent times, Great Britain conquered them. Before that, the Muslim world conquered part of them. I'll have more to say about that in chapter 7. But they were destined to... now, something else I've observed. Pacifism. I hate to say it, but my father was a pacifist. And my brother's a pacifist. I am not. I joined an army one time, and I was in the Georgia National Guard for 6 years, ready to fight for my country if need be. During the time I was in, there was no war. I got out unscathed. I was aware that to myself when I joined, a lot of men who have joined this have wound up missing limbs, arms and legs, or permanently crippled, permanently wounded. A lot of them wind up dead. I put one hand on the Bible and raised the other hand to heaven and swore to defend my country. I'm not the least bit embarrassed to tell you that, and I hope he's been ashamed of it. Pacifism leads to one war. It's a one-way trip to war. After World War I was so terrible, that after World War I, everybody was a pacifist, and especially the Jews. The Jews, Albert Einstein, if you wrote books about why war, he was a very famous pacifist. Now, I have been told that today, in today's Jewish synagogues, the Jewish rabbis do not teach pacifism anymore. Because 6 million of them were thrown alive in that lion's hardness and burned alive. And this is what people will do to you if you don't stand up for yourself and defend yourself. Don't tell me it won't happen. My father was a young man that was about your age when it did happen. That's how it's recently it's been. Again, if any of you have heard of a Jewish rabbi teaching pacifism, you're welcome to say so. I haven't. They don't. Pacifism leads to war, and the people of India found this out the hard way as they have fought one war. They eventually got to what was called the rule of the fishes. Rule of the fishes, where the big fish gobbled up the little fish. The big fish, then the big fish would gobble the little fish, but then a bigger fish would come his way and gobble him up. And this went on for some 2,000 or 3,000 years in India, down through history. All right, so that's so much for the political history right now. I do want to talk a little bit more about their religion and the practical effect of it, but first, while I'm thinking about it, I had better pause if I can get this computer to work. And call roll. Okay. GC Zing. Okay. Yeah, okay. Enzo. Now, Raniel is absent. All right. I see Hope is here. Michael is here. Damon Johnson. Haley. Oh, okay, you're here. Chanda. I just talked about Chanda a minute ago. Anyway, that's Patrick Hutton. Christopher, Joseph, Quentin Boatwright. Alexis Seymour. All right. Razmi is here. John is here. Regina is here. Nairobi. Oh, okay, you moved. Robert. Rodney. Okay. Here's what I have down. Reniel, Patrick, Quentin, Alexis. All right, the rest of them be counted present. Actually, come to think of it, I mean, this is I really don't need to take roll from here on out because the ones of you who turn in a test will be counted present, the rest of you won't. I'm kind of trying to get to know your names. From here on out, I won't be calling roll. All right, moving on. Eventually, I mentioned the primary religion was Hinduism, but there came another religion that competed with Hinduism for a while. There is a man, and again, I'm not going to try to pronounce his real name, but I'll call him Buddha, which is what he's known better by anyway. Buddha was the son of one of the Indian kings. Folk, let me tell you, I had an argument with a boss one time at Lockheed, but he said this story was impossible. I will admit it's somewhat plausible, but it's not impossible. And this story has been told for 2,600 years, so you can make it what you want to. Anyway, Buddha was, when the young Buddha was born, a soothsayer told his father, this man is going to start a big new movement in India. And he's going to experience a whole lot of grief and sorrow. Well, the father said, I don't care what that soothsayer says. I'm going to make sure that my son never experiences sorrow. So Buddha was kept away from any sickness. Anyone who was sick, he wasn't allowed to see. Anyone who died, he was not allowed to see anymore. Nobody explained why the certain people just disappeared from his life. This went on for 20 years. One day he was walking along with a group of his father's servants. And his father's servants had not been as diligent as they might have been, and they did not remove an old man from his pathway. And for the first time, young Buddha saw an old man hobbling along with a cane and wrinkled up and shriveled, and Buddha was just simply shocked, thrown into a state of shock. And if you ask me, I mean, young Buddha was spoiled and rotten, but whatever, that's something else. Anyway, okay, I'm going to remind you of a story I heard about a young woman one time who, her parents decided, this daughter of ours is never going to see us quarrel. So she grew up with never hearing her parents quarrel. She got married, and if you can believe this part of the story, one day she and her husband got into a quarrel. Oh, this is a normal part of marriage. It happens in every marriage. But she did not believe it should happen to her, and she actually got so upset that she got sick and had to be hospitalized. I mean, just thrown into a state of shock. Her mother came and said to her, okay, now listen, my girl. These things happen in a marriage. It's normal. Yes, your father and I did quarrel. Maybe we were wrong in keeping you two sheltered, but get well, go back and be a wife to your husband, because, and yes, you're going to have more quarrels in the future. Say that to say this, I think the same thing happened to young Buddha. He was thrown into a state of shock, and after that he couldn't go back to his palace. He realized, hey, are there a lot of people like this? Oh, Your Majesty, everybody eventually becomes like, you mean I'm going to become that way myself? Yes, Your Majesty, you're going to become that way yourself someday. Well, he simply spent a lot of his time fasting, grieving, worrying, and eventually he developed a religion. A religion that, in effect, I mean, I'm just going to go over it briefly, called for accepting things the way they are. What will be, and there's not much you can do about it. The main theme of Buddhism is to get rid of desire. The main reason why we have problems is we have desire. Get rid of desire and all your problems will go away. Well, what if a tornado comes and kills everybody in my family just except for me? Well, you shouldn't desire your family anyway. Divorce yourself from your emotions, and if that happens to you, you won't get hurt because they'll. Now again, folks, I'm teaching about this. Don't think I'm teaching this to you. I am not. But I'm teaching about it because it is a big part. I mean, Buddhism eventually was to become the main religion of a lot of Southeast Asia. It was to spread into Korea, a little bit to China and Japan. And for a while, it looked like it was going to take over India. And it forced Hinduism to change its ways a little bit. And eventually, Hinduism dominated, and Buddhism took a back seat in India. But anyway, to get rid of desire, and everything will be okay. And he taught, among other things, that you find happiness in life if you choose the right occupation, do the right meditation. He named 8 rights. Now, I'm not going to ask you to name them, but on the test, some of you might see the question, name some things Buddha believed. Well, he did believe in reincarnation. Among other things, he believed in the existence of the soul. And he believed in 8 rights, including right meditation, right occupation, and if you did these things all the right way, you would find happiness in this life, and you would then find a better life in the next life. Unlike Hinduism, Buddhism was more egalitarian, and this appealed to the lower caste. Also, Buddha had a higher opinion of women than did Hinduism, at least initially, and put women and men more equal than Hinduism did. But he placed all the castes more equal than did Hinduism. It's more what they call egalitarian. And a person who was even of the pariah caste could go directly to nirvana, his ultimate state of reality. Whereas in the Hinduism, a person of the lower caste had to go through these other castes before they could get to an ultimate higher state of reality. Now, the places where Buddha visited were eventually set up, and they were called stupas. These are the holy places in Buddhism, the places where that Buddha is known to have visited. Now, eventually, a ruler came along named Asoka. Asoka was started out conquering a lot of India and conquered much of India. And occasionally some of these rulers were able to unite more of India than others often were. Asoka then converted to Buddhism and encouraged the spread of Buddhism. He commissioned a bunch of missionaries whose job was to go out and convert people to Buddhism. And he was the one who's largely set up these stupas so that they would get people to worship in these holy places. The Buddhists set up monasteries where that the Buddhists then could separate some men as holy men. And in these monasteries, they would meditate and contemplate and write and preserve ancient records from very ancient times. And they've done a lot to preserve history, even as the same thing has happened with Christian monasteries and Christian monks. All right. Let's see. All right, now bear with me a moment while I try to find the last thing. I'm about to leave India and go to China, but before I do, oops, gotta go here. History. Okay. Now, anything that I have left off, whoops. Oh yes. Now, this I must mention. There are persons who believe that originally all people were monotheistic, and as evidence, they point to India and China. In the case of India, they say that the original god was a god named Deus. They say that Deus is the same as the Spanish Dios, or the Chinese Shang Di. Again, you see this D is in deity, Deus, deity, Dios, Shang Di. In every case, though, the worship of the one God was replaced by the worship of many gods, as they began to believe that this one God was very distant, very remote, and did not seem to care about them, and instead they worshipped a myriad of lesser gods, that most of us were not good enough to go to the high God. I mean, again, this is them, folk, not me, understand? This is their teaching. So if the original God of the Indians was Deus, eventually he fell out of worship in favor of the many, many gods that was to come later. Now, another religion of India was Jainism. Jainism did not attract the following that Hinduism had, maybe because it had a certain element of illogic to it. The Jainists believed that there was no beginning to our existence. The world we live in always has existed. It never had a beginning, and it always will. And it just that from the beginning we all existed and went on and on and on, and always will go on and on and on. To what purpose, to what aim? I'm not sure that they knew. All right. Now, your book from here on out will always mention the role of women in every chapter. Chapter 2 is no exception. In ancient India, women were considered to play an inferior role. They were not kings. Now again, there might have been one or two exceptions. In the case of Egypt, there was an exception. An Egyptian ruler named Hatshepsut was a woman. And in China, you had from time to time a few emperors. And in Vietnam, you had a lady who led. In Great Britain here, you had a woman who led for a while. In both Vietnam and Britain, the woman lost in a rebellion against their overlords. In Great Britain, the woman lost to the Romans, and in Vietnam, the woman lost to the Chinese. But for the most part in India, women played a role of subservience. In both India and in China, in time of hardship, female babies were killed because it was considered a burden to support them. The males were often not killed, but they're all right. Folk, I've never experienced this. I doubt many of you have. But throughout history, there have been periods of famine, water-moving famine, where for some reason the crops do not grow, or the frost comes earlier than expected, or a farmer plants his crops thinking, oh, there'll be no frost after this, and all of a sudden the frost will come right as his crops are coming up. This happened in Georgia just last year with the blueberries and peaches just a little bit farther south. The farm, the blueberries and peaches both blossomed, bloomed, and almost got ripe. And then came a snowstorm in March of last year. Probably none of you remember it. And it destroyed and wiped out almost all the blueberry and the peach crop. And do any of you remember this? None of you do, but this happened to us. But see, in our case, we have trains and we have planes, and we can still get peaches from other places and blueberries from other places. But of course, the poor farmers were hurting, but the farmers, a lot of them had insurance against something like this, so the government or the insurance company reimbursed them. But in those days, they starved when this happened. And starvation, famine was a continual threat because they just simply did not grow enough food to last for years and years and store to last for years. Now, all right. Now, let's see. Now, oh yeah. The good deeds that we do in this life that determine where we go in the next life is called the karma. Good or bad deeds that determine where we go in the next life. Now, and here's one that hardly anybody ever misses when I ask on the test. Yoga. Body training, deep meditation. Again, it has to do with assuming a certain stance for maybe hours on end and going into a deep meditative state. Hopefully to discipline your body and get your mind off of the things of this world and onto the things of the next. All right. Oh yes, yes, yes. Raha. High one. Maharaja. Very, very high one. Same thing, an expert on religious matters. And again, this comes from Hinduism. guru. Rush Limbaugh used to refer to himself as Maharishi, or the great, great Rush. But anyway, the very high Rush Limbaugh. I threw that in to maybe help you remember it. It might help you, if you don't know it already, to remember some of this stuff. All right, with that in mind, be back, folk, at 20 after, and we'll start on China. Take about 10.